Dear friends, welcome. Welcome to Deer Park Monastery. Many people are writing to us and asking, what can they do? What can they do right now? Some of them, they have fear for their children. They have fear for their loved ones. They have fear for those of us who are most vulnerable here in the United States and elsewhere. And they want to know, they ask the monks and nuns, what can I do? In our mindfulness trainings, we commit to strive to take a stand against injustice. That is our commitment that we make when we recite the 5 mindfulness trainings. And we, as monastics, we make a lifelong vow to be truly free. So we need to understand what is freedom. We need to study and understand more deeply what does it actually mean to be free. Mostly we think about political freedom when we hear the word freedom. But it turns out if we're not free in our heart, we cannot be politically free. It's only a sham, a magical illusion of freedom. You get a choice between your prison. Would you like a prison with bad food and bars, iron bars, or would you like a prison with deluxe designer couches and high quality, unlimited entertainment? So that's not a real choice of freedom. So to choose freedom, it means we need to look into our fear. And that is a daily practice. That is a moment-to-moment practice. And we have to be free from our attachment to this body. From thinking that this body is me. That what happens to this body is my ultimate concern. And I need to protect it at all costs. I need to protect my own life at all costs. Even if those who are less protected, more vulnerable, are put in danger. In the 1930s, many Austrians, they looked on with amusement as Austrian Jews were put to sweep and clean the roads and given demeaning jobs. Their amusement also masked their fear of what was happening. And when I was a young person, I finished college and I had an increased awareness of being born here in America and the dangers that my own life posed for people around the world. What I decided to do with this situation of being born a white male in the United States of America. And I didn't have a path. I didn't know where to go, what to do, but I knew that there was a great danger, and with my every thought, with my every word, with my every action, that I was influencing the happiness or the suffering of my own future and the future of many others. And so I had a friend in Ireland. I called up and I said, "Can I come and stay at your house?" And I ended up spending almost 3 years and living in Spain, in France, in Europe, and I learned a lot during those 3 years, and especially I learned about the lived experience of the authoritarian governments that had wreaked havoc in Europe in the 20th century. This was 1997, 1998. Maybe I'm dating myself a little bit. And so as we looked at the new millennium, we ask ourselves, how do we want to live on this planet Earth? What can we do to protect future generations from undergoing this terrible, horrific experience of fanaticism, of destruction? And I learned that, for example, in Germany, you cannot just speak about anything you like. I came to question my ideas about this kind of absolute freedom of speech. There is certain hate speech that you cannot engage in, and that is born from experience. I don't need to go into details. I think you understand. And our teacher also had an experience of living under authoritarianism in Vietnam. The Geneva Accords in 1954 split Vietnam, north and south. Hundreds of thousands of refugees left the north of Vietnam. Catholics, Buddhists, Sister Hien Hai, Su Ngoai, our elder sister here in Clarity Hamlet. She's 95, 96 years old, something like that. During the Lunar New Year, I sat at her feet and I asked her lots of questions. Because I taught a course about Thay's life, which we hope to offer again online this past fall. And I learned so much teaching that class. And and because Su Ngoai is almost the age of our teacher, I wanted to hear her experience. And she fled from the north of Vietnam, her ancestral village, from many, many generations. Here in America, perhaps we are used to being uprooted. Our ancestors, every one of them, uprooted themselves from their native land, except for a very small percentage of us on this continent. They uprooted themselves, and there was something within them that could not stay. Maybe it was fear, maybe it was poverty, a wish for something better. And so we take for granted that this uprootedness in our ancestral lineage. But for Sister Hien Hai, her ancestors have lived in that village for probably more generations than she even knows, or certainly than I know. And the situation caused her to leave and take a boat to Da Nang. and later to Pleiku, and eventually after 1975, she made Bunryu in the streets of Saigon, what was renamed as Ho Chi Minh City. So Thai also experienced, after that split in the country, the Ngo Dinh Diem regime. And many Americans here, we didn't know who this person was. We didn't know how the CIA was supporting his regime already in the 1950s. And he continued to use both religion and other means to create a repressive regime. Thai created the first version of what we experience here now in Deer Park Monastery, in a small piece of land in the mountains of the central highlands of Vietnam called Fragrant Palm Leaves Hermitage. First Thai was living in a hut in Bao Lak, in Chua Yi, trying to remember the name of the temple in Bao Lak where Thai lived. Phúc Huế temple. And Thai knew the venerable there, and he was a young Dharma teacher in the 1950s. And he had been named to be the editor of the first journal which attempted to bring all Buddhist groups together in Vietnam. It's called Phap Luu Vietnam. Buddhism in Vietnam. Thai was very young, but some elder monks who could see his potential. They could see the beauty in what he was writing in his poetry, and his deep wish to update the monastic education in Vietnam. And so one venerable, even though he was very, very elderly, he because he was very senior, he took on that editorship, and he made Thai the assistant editor. And a few months later, he passed away after a trip to Kathmandu. And Thai became the main editor. And Thai wrote many articles. In fact, even if you look at those, I've looked at the pages of those journal articles, and you only see Thai's name on the poetry. Very few things. It's because Thai used many pen names. He wrote articles about government, he wrote articles about Vietnamese folk tales, he wrote articles about Buddhist philosophy, but he used different names. Maybe 50-60% of the articles were written by Thai. Maybe Thai had difficulty to find somebody else to write articles. I know I started the Deer Park newsletter, Hidden Mountain Record, and I heard we will get the second version tomorrow. And it's not easy to get the monastics to write articles. So I think it's a mix that Thai had his vision for Buddhism in Vietnam, and he needed to express that, but also he could not find people to write the articles, so he wrote them himself. And Thai became frustrated. At that point, he was living in the hut in Phúc Huế temple, and he said very strong things about the monks who didn't want to give up their little fiefdom. You know, different areas of Vietnam were controlled by different monks. And in order to bring Buddhism together and reform monastic education, it means they had to let go of some of their power. And some venerables stood in the way, they blocked this change that was happening. Thai wanted to bring science, Thai wanted to bring Western philosophy, aspects of Western education into monastic education. And some venerables, they blocked the way, and they cut the funding for the Journal of Buddhism in Vietnam. And Thich was so hurt. Because when you're a young person and you have a deep aspiration, you depend on the support of your elder brothers and sisters. And to feel from the institution that Thich is cut off, so painful. Thich doesn't care about Ngô Đình Diệm. Thich doesn't care about the government and all of these things, but Thich cared deeply about his elders, that they feel he's doing something that could be harming the Buddhist tradition. And so Thich had to nurse those wounds in himself. And so he put a sign up in that hut. Phấn bởi áo, fragrant palm leaves hermitage. And that began a movement, and Thich brought together young people, not only monastics, also Buddhist practitioners, and they found a piece of land, and they agreed with the tribe members to buy that land. The tribal members, they could not even read or write. They had to put this kind of scrawl or the thumbprint on the document. And later Thich said that the communist government would use that document against Thich. That Thich is a land owner. He's a land-owning monk. He's not a simple monk. Yeah. But so even when Thich started Plum Village, he didn't put his name on anything. That caused us problem later. He put it in that person's name, that person, but then one man, he passed away, and then his children, they said, we now own the upper hamlet of Plum Village. Anyway, I won't get into that story. But Thich, I think that was the last time Thich put his name on something, because he saw how it was used to attack him. So Thich had a lot of experience with people having wrong perceptions about Thich's intention, Thich's wish for people to be free, for his brothers and sisters, his monastic siblings, to really touch the beauty of the Buddha's teaching, to wake up. And he had to learn as a young Dharma teacher to deal with the jealousy and the hatred and the misunderstandings of those close to him, even some of his Dharma brothers. And that the fragrant palm leaves hermitage had a beautiful flowering, but they started to get too much attention from the Ngô Đình Diệm regime, and they started to attack. One of the intellectuals living there with Thich, he was imprisoned when he was in Bảo Lộc, in town. And Thich knew that soon he would not be protected. Even though he's a Buddhist monk, he would not be protected. And fragrant palm leaves hermitage only flourished for a very short time, a year and a few months. And Thich knew that this minority that was in power in his country, was causing so much damage, was supported by the United States government. And so he wanted to learn, what is it in the collective consciousness of another country that makes it support such a regime in mind. So Thich applied for Fulbright scholarship and came to study in Princeton University, 1961. You can go on the Princeton website and see Thai's application, Thai's photo, and his letters of recommendation from other monks. They say, Thai is very brilliant. But one monk said, but he's a little bit cold. Very interesting detail. Thai was still transforming himself. One time we were having monastic day in Plum Village, and because my Vietnamese is not very good, so I had to listen to the translation. And so I listened to Sister Chang Kong translating. And she said before Thai started to give the Dharma talk, she said, Thai was not always the beautiful flower that you see today. I don't know what she meant by that statement. But I know that because Thai told us how Thai had to transform himself, Thai also had his father in him. Thai once told us, Thai's father only became angry once a year. But when he became angry, everybody knew it in the household. So Thai also had to transform his anger. And most of my monastic life, I practiced transforming my anger. Luckily, I have very patient monastic siblings. Some are more patient than others. Here we can listen to the sound of the bell. So Thai came to Princeton to understand what is it in the collective consciousness of the United States of America that causes so much violence in my country, so much ideological conflict, dividing families, brother from brother and sister. He wanted to learn how to resist tyranny. And so he studied many different religions. He studied with some of the great ethicists and scholars of that time in religion at Princeton, later at Columbia University. He wanted to understand how he could go deeply into his own tradition and find the ways to resist this kind of tyranny, to assure freedom, how to build a community of resistance that is lasting. And he saw in Vietnam evidence of dynasties that resisted the authoritarianism coming from the north, from China. The Li dynasty, the Chun dynasties. He found a king, Chan Yan Dong, who, after repelling the Mongol invaders twice, abdicated his throne, went to Yintu mountain in the north, and took on the robes of a monk, practiced meditation. I don't know of any other kings who've done that. He clearly is not interested in power and authority and controlling. He wants to be free, truly free. That is a real kind of ruler. And so we need to look in our lives for real leaders who want to be free, who have compassion and understanding in their heart. Because they will not always be in a political position. Sometimes it happens, but we do not take it for granted that those in positions of power will have understanding or compassion. So he found these elements of true leadership in the history of Vietnam, and he looked deeply to see how he could build a community, how he could teach Buddhism in such a way that the young people in Vietnam would have hope for a better future, for freedom, inner freedom and political freedom. And because he did that, he's a very dangerous monk for those in power. And so when he spoke, he came back to the United States in 1966, May of 1966, invited by Cornell University to speak about Vietnamese Buddhism, but Thai didn't speak a whole lot about Vietnamese Buddhism. Thai went on a speaking tour supported by the Fellowship of Reconciliation. He met Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He met Thomas Merton. He met those who were deeply committed to peace, those spiritual figures, leaders, practicing, living freedom, not only Buddhist, Protestant, Catholic. And he found true brothers in them. He saw that there is something in the spiritual path that can assure us freedom. And soon Thai learned he was not welcome to come back to Vietnam, that it was too dangerous. The Key and Thieu regime would probably have Thai assassinated if Thai returned to Vietnam. Thai planned to go for 3 months. Thai stayed for 39 years in exile because he was not afraid to speak his heart, to speak his mind. And so what do we do when we find ourselves in a situation where so many are living in fear? Where those forms of those structures, institutions which we put our faith in, which our ancestors have given their lives to build so that we could have a freedom for not just 5 years, 10 years, 100 years, so that future generations can live freely on this continent, on Turtle Island. When those institutions are being disrupted, dismantled. This is not about taking sides. Deer Park has been built from the beginning as a community of resistance, a place to preserve freedom. Yesterday, we had our first working day on the Happy Farm. We started the first Happy Farm in Plum Village in 2011, 2012. In this hall in 2004, I was a novice, and we made a Sangha Karman. It means a decision of the entire community at that time, that we would go in the direction of growing our own organic food. Only partly because we want to be healthy. Mainly it's to preserve our freedom. Grow food local. The 20th century has seen the destruction of the American farmer. One of our neighbors, Spencer, at Sage Hills Farm. We are so lucky to have him as a neighbor. 7 years ago, he started a farm on his parents' property that he'd grown up on, run around as a kid. Now he's growing tomatoes, salad greens, kale, all organic, using human power. The only machine he has is a kind of for, what do you say, ATV, all-terrain vehicle, to drive around on the property, because it's quite uneven. He is creating a community of resistance, of resilience and resilience. He offers boxes of fresh veggies to the homeless shelter in San Diego, so that people who are living on the street can have fresh food, not just canned food. But he is bucking the trend. We have put things in place for our own convenience, for our own comfort, that have dismantled the very foundation that made the United States of America resilient and free. And now we are dealing with a situation. So we are lucky that we have the Dharma, that the Dharma has taken root here in this continent, because we have a path. And I want to share with you a story of the Buddha. In his last years, there's a King Ajatashatru who was jealous of the power of his father. His father was the first one to offer land to the Buddhist community, the bamboo grove, the Vajji, King Bimbisara. When the Buddha got enlightened under the Bodhi tree, the Buddha had promised the king that he would come back and teach him the Dharma. So he returned to Rajagiraha, and where the King Bimbisara had his palace, and he was accompanied by the Kashyapa brothers, who were kind of these dreadlocked, fire-worshipping ascetics that the Buddha had inspired to cut their hair, take on the robe of a monk, and teach and learn the Dharma. But they were very famous spiritual teachers, and nobody knew who the Buddha was. He was an unknown, and they were like, like Eckhart Tolle or something, somebody well-known, somebody on Oprah, or I don't know, that you know really well. But they when they met the Buddha, they saw the Buddha had a deeper understanding. But the people were confused. So when the Buddha came, they saw the Buddha and they saw Uravela Kashyapa, very famous spiritual teacher. And they said, "Who is the teacher? Is it the Buddha or Uravela Kashyapa?" And so Uravela Kashyapa, he took a fan and he went behind the Buddha and he started fanning the Buddha. Yeah. And King Bimbisara came and he saw the early Sangha of the Buddha, and he's so happy, so inspired by what the Buddha had realized and done. He could see it in the Sangha, in the mindful steps of the monks that followed the Sangha. The people in the town, they heard about all the young men shaving their head and putting on the ochre robe of a monk. So they said, "Hide your sons! Don't let them meet this person. We don't know what's happening. He went out with his hair, he came back like this. I don't know what happened." But King Bimbisara was so impressed by the Buddha, and so he said, "I want to give you my most beautiful forest, bamboo grove. I want to give it to you, dear Buddha." And the Buddha said, "No. Don't give it to me. Give it to the Sangha in the 10 directions." And that tradition has continued until today. This land of Deer Park, it doesn't belong to me, it doesn't belong to Tai Phap Luu, it doesn't belong to Tai. It belongs to the Sangha in the 10 directions, the noble Sangha. We are only stewards of this place. We are not landowners. And it is here for you to take refuge in. We practice to protect this space and all the living beings in it with our practice of the Dharma, of mindful breathing, mindful walking, mindful eating. But it is there for everyone to enjoy. The mountain bikers who ride their bikes up. We have some kids with very fast bikes. They ride up the hill like 35 miles per hour. Electric, it's like electric motorcycle. But, the other day they rode up, they came down here and they invited the large bell. Bong! In the middle of the day. Like they want to make a prank. So we practice tolerance. So that is the spirit in which the bamboo grove was given to the Buddha. And so that was early on the Buddha's path. But the story I want to tell is about the last years of the Buddha's life. And this King Ajatashatru had somehow, we don't know exactly, there's different tellings of the story, but he was jealous of his father's power. And he didn't want to wait until his father passed away to inherit the kingdom. So he imprisoned his own father and eventually starved him to death. And he felt incredible remorse, but he was torn by his lust for power and control. And he also colluded with the Buddha's cousin Devadatta. And Devadatta wanted to make himself the new Buddha, like better than the Buddha. Buddha 2.0. And he colluded with King Ajatashatru, who had compromised his own integrity to get the kingship. And they tried to kill the Buddha, but they were not successful. They had somebody roll a boulder down a mountain, and it only wounded the Buddha's toe a little bit. He had a little bit of blood. They sent an assassin, but the assassin lost heart in the middle of the night, when he met the Buddha. They sent a raging elephant, a bull elephant, came stampeding towards the Buddha on the Buddha's alms round. The Buddha just enjoyed mindful walking. He didn't give in to his fear. And the elephant stopped right in front of the Buddha. The Buddha just put his hand on the elephant. So Ajatasattu, he suffered so much, and eventually he was in so much suffering that he tried every other spiritual philosophy, but eventually he realized the Buddha's teaching was the best. And his minister, who was the physician of the Buddha, invited him to come and get teaching of the Buddha. And so he came, and there were many monks around, sitting in total silence. And suddenly the king thought it was an ambush, that he was going to get killed. But the monks were just sitting in meditation. That's what they did all the time. They weren't trying to ambush the king. So he overcame his fear and paranoia, and he came and he learned from the Buddha. The Buddha taught him the Dharma. And after he left, the Buddha said, if he had not killed his father, he would have been able to get awakening from the teaching I gave him. But because of this terrible deed, unfortunately, he can only get a little bit of benefit. So King Ajatashatru, he knew the Buddha was very wise, and he fell again into his raging impulses in the last years of the Buddha's life and decided he wanted to invade the country next to Magadha, the Buddha's homeland. And it's called the Vajji country. And so he sent his minister Vasakara to announce to the Buddha about his intentions. Thich writes about it in chapter 78 of this story of the life of the Buddha, Old Pathway class. Thich's language is a little bit more polite, but I want to read the less polite version. Because we are hearing all kinds of things every day in the news, and I think it's equal in levels of outrage as what we're hearing on a daily basis. I shall wipe out these Vajjis so mighty and powerful. I shall destroy them and lay ruin and devastation upon them. So that's literally what's recorded. Yeah. I have a couple other versions just for posterity's sake. Okay, this one just says that the king vowed to destroy them. That's a Sanskrit version. The first one I just read, that's in Pali, so from the Southern Buddhist tradition. This one is from Chinese. Go to Vulture Peak, to the place of the Buddha, announce my name, Ajatashatru, pay homage at the Blessed One's feet, and inquire after the Buddha's well-being. Is the Buddha at ease, dwelling in peace and in good health? Then express my words to him. The people of Vajji are self-reliant in their strength, numerous and powerful, and do not submit to me. I wish to attack them. I do not know what the instructions the Buddha may have for me. If there is any teaching or instruction, you must remember it well and not omit anything. Speak exactly as you have heard. The words of the Buddha are never in vain. So he had enough insight to know that the Buddha doesn't ever joke around, tell lies, fabricate reality. He only speaks the truth in his heart. And so he has some little bit of wisdom and he wants to hear what the Buddha has to say about his plan. So Vasakara comes to the Buddha, and the Venerable Ananda was present, standing behind the Buddha, fanning him. The Buddha turned to Ananda and asked, Venerable Ananda, have you heard whether or not the people of Vajji still regularly gather together in large numbers to discuss politics? Ananda answered, Lord, I have heard that the people of Vajji often assemble in large numbers to discuss the political situation. Then the Vajji people will prosper, Ananda. They cannot be destroyed so easily. And tell me, do you know whether or not they still display a spirit of cooperation and unity during their meetings? Lord, I have heard they enjoy great cooperation and unity. Well then, the Vajji people will prosper, will continue to grow. Ananda. Ananda, do the people of Vajji still respect and follow the laws that have been enacted in their country? Lord, I have heard that they respect and follow all their laws. Then it is certain Vajji still will prosper. They cannot be easily destroyed or submit to tyranny. Ananda, do the people of Vajji respect and listen to worthy leaders, those of virtue who speak their heart, who are not interested in power and control, but only want freedom and to protect those who are vulnerable. Lord, I have heard that the people of Vajji respect and listen to worthy leaders. Then it is certain their country will still prosper. Ananda, have you heard whether or not there is rape and other violent crime in Vajji? It means, is it fallen into lawlessness and violence? Paramilitary groups of men going, raping women, stealing, stoking fear in the hearts of people. Lord, there is almost no rape or other violent crime in their country. Then Vajji continues to prosper. Ananda, have you heard whether or not the people of Vajji still protect and maintain the shrines of their ancestors? The peoples who've lived there for centuries. We have our shrines here in America. The Rocky Mountains, Yosemite Valley, arches, Joshua Tree, the ancient drawings of the Anasazi, the mounds of the Cahokia and the Ohio River. Lord, it is said that they protect and maintain the shrines of their ancestors. Then Vajji still prospers. Have you heard whether or not the people of Vajji respect, make offerings to, and study with spiritual teachers who have attained the way? Whether they are Christian, whether they are Muslim, whether they are Buddhist, whatever their spiritual path, those who have true happiness and joy, who let go of their fear. I'm adding a little bit to the Buddhist, what the Buddha said. Lord, they continue to respect, make offerings to, and study with spiritual teachers who have attained the way. Ananda, it is then certain that Vajji still prospers. Ananda, some time ago, the Buddha had the opportunity, or the Buddha used the term Tathagata to refer to himself. The Tathagata, I had the opportunity to speak with Vajji's leaders about these 7 practices which make a country prosper. They are called the 7 practices of no regression. It means you cannot regress to tyranny, to authoritarianism. If you practice these as a people, if you come together regularly to talk about what's happening in person, not only on Zoom. It has to be in person. Places like Deer Park, everywhere we can create places where we come together, we talk about what's going on. Don't sit in your house alone with fear in your heart on a screen. It's not enough. That's not the way. That's not sufficient to resist tyranny. Coming together in harmony, we have to let go of our petty differences and trust in one another as human beings on this planet Earth. That we all have goodness in our heart. We all have a Buddha that is waking up. Sometimes we are a part-time Buddha. So nourish the part-time Buddha. Don't think you have to be a Buddha all the time. Yeah. But then you just think it's like the Buddha is somebody who lived 2,600 years ago. And what a pity that we are in this Dharma ending age, in this kind of gibberish, rubbish. The Buddha is in every one of us. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is in the heart of every one of us. Walking in Selma, in a jail in Birmingham. In 1968, when King was assassinated, Thich said, America can produce a king, but it cannot keep a king. It means Dr. Martin Luther King. Thich could not eat for almost 2 weeks after the assassination of Dr. King. And he made the deep vow to continue the project they had discussed together, which was to build a beloved community. A community that lives in harmony and awareness. And that is what we are doing here. We're not trying to propagate Buddhism. We're not trying to, we are happy when people shave their head and become monks and nuns. I think you can guarantee a lot of freedom and happiness for yourself if you take that path. But we're not only here to make monks and nuns. We are here to build beloved community, multifold community, to protect everyone, even those who have choices in their life about sexual orientation, gender, that we may not understand. But we see their humanity, and we recognize that we have to protect everyone, because when the most vulnerable are harmed, our own freedom becomes less. And that is a lesson from Germany in the 1930s. And you can read about it in many books. I don't need to tell you. But with the insight of no self, we see that there are these patterns that happen in history. It's not about personalities. The mistake is that we think it's about personalities. We need to look at the patterns and learn from our ancestors, the situation they found themselves in. We need to practice mindful breathing, mindful walking, and look beyond just our idea of a self and observe what is happening with non-fear. And we don't feel like we have to do it alone. We have a community. This community is beloved community. And there are beloved communities everywhere when we look for them. People with real understanding, with compassion and love in their heart. And we don't have to agree 100%. I think I heard Thai one time asked one of our sisters. Oh no, he asked a few of the monastics. I was not there, but I heard the story. Thai said, how much harmony do you think we need in the Sangha? And some of the monastics said, because they know that Thai loves harmony, so they say, 95% Thai, 100%, 110%. And what I heard Thai said is, Thai thinks 60% is good enough. If we can have 60% harmony, it's good enough. Yeah? But when you abandon your community because of the small, petty conflicts, you lose a source of strength, your source of resilience. You lose what is most dear, which is the beloved community. So why would you leave your community because of such a little bit of disharmony? We have to look beyond our ideas of perfect. The perfect is the enemy of the good, right? That's what we say. And see that no community is perfect. But in a community where there's a real practice of mindfulness, concentration, and insight, those words you see up there on the stained glass window in Sanskrit, that there is the Buddha, there is the Dharma, there is the Sangha. Even that community is imperfect. And Deer Park is not perfect. But we have the Buddha within the Deer Park community. We have the Dharma within the Deer Park community. We have the Sangha within the Deer Park community. And so we have no trouble with a little bit of misunderstandings or wrong perceptions. We can overcome that because we see that we can, together, we can preserve freedom. We can grow our freedom. Just like the Vajji people, we know how to come together and talk about what's going on in Dharma sharing, Dharma discussion, which we will do right after this Dharma talk. We know how to come together and in harmony and live in harmony, to make consensus-based decisions, democratic decisions. No one person makes all the decisions here at Deer Park. Not even just some of the decisions. We know how to protect ourselves from tyranny, from authoritarianism. Thai trained us in how to do it. And we continue to do it every day. And we also know how to rebel a little bit when somebody becomes a little bit too powerful. We know how to preserve democracy in the Sangha. So we can learn from this community and how to preserve democracy outside of this Sangha. And that is a work for us to do. Homework. How do we keep the beautiful democracy? Thai called it in our introduction to the Vinaya the highest form of government. In a democracy, the people are the highest. Not someone's idea of the people. Real people that we see in flesh and blood, that we rub shoulders with, that sometimes we argue with, sometimes we disagree with, but we find their humanity. We know how to respect elders who are wise. There are elders now in the United States, like Timothy Snyder, Robert Reich, the former Secretary of Labor. They are not interested in power. They want to know how we can preserve our freedom, given what is going on, so we can listen to what they have to say, and many, many others. Jane Fonda. I just give an example. This is from Timothy Snyder, a professor of history at Yale, who specializes on the rise of Nazi Germany. What he learned from the rise of authoritarianism in the 1930s. 1, do not obey in advance. Most of the power of authoritarianism is freely given. In times like these, individuals think ahead about what a more repressive government will want, and then offer themselves without being asked. The concentration camps, Hitler didn't order those. Those were members of his military wing. They came up with that idea without even asking. The killing camps. Look for those who are finding ways to create power structures now. Real time, I'm talking about now. This is not a rehearsal. We have to look with the eyes of compassion and understanding. Not just because I tell you. You do it because you want to preserve the kind of freedom that we have here at Deer Park. The kind of community that is here and elsewhere as well. We have to look to communities of resistance and not obey in advance. Not freely offer in order to curry favor, thinking that we'll get some benefit. A citizen who adapts in this way, obeying in advance, is teaching power what it can do. I'm skimming. Defend institutions. I know there are institutions full of bureaucracy, full of inefficiency, but they're also human institutions. And they have protected our people, our education system, our national parks, our workers. We have to pay attention. And we take responsibility for the face of the world. It means when we see symbols of hate, we find a way to remove them. We do not allow hate, words of hate, signs of hate. That is when you look around Deer Park Monastery, you see every word has thought and intention. Every display, everything that we do, the way this meditation hall is built, the way we clear our trails, is with the spirit of nonviolence and creating a language of hate and understanding, a language of love to resist, the tendency towards sensual desires, and now language of hate that we find outside in the world. So I just touched on a few things because it's just a short time for this Dharma talk. But I really wish that we all look deeply into ourselves and see what we can do, because you have the power to change the future. Don't for a moment fall into defeatism. You have agency in your life. You can decide what you think, what you say, and what you do. That is a great power that mindfulness gives us. And the future is still not yet written. So don't numb yourself with consumerism, entertainment, and so forth. Come out, work on the happy farm. We announced the new Thich Nhat Hanh School of Interbeing at the foot of the mountain. We want to raise our children in such a way that these very human qualities are made strong in their consciousness so that they can preserve freedom, happiness, and joy for future generations, because they will be the leaders of the future. We're going to throw so many positive projects at you, and we want you to help us, because that's what we need now. Because Thai told the people in the village of Vietnam that was bombed the first time to rebuild. When it was bombed the second time, they came to Thai and they said, "What should we do? Maybe we should just give up." Thai said, "No, we have to rebuild." And when they bombed the village a third time, they were lost in despair. What is the point of rebuilding? They will just bomb it again. They think the Viet Cong are in our village, and they think the only way to keep them out is to destroy it. And Thai said, "You have to rebuild. You have to rebuild." He told them, "You rebuild that village." And that is the spirit that we have here at Deer Park. So whatever will come our way, we will rebuild. We will build the happy farm, we will build the school, we will continue to build with your help, because we need these institutions. We need this kind of new way of looking at the world that can help us to resist and not fall into the situation in Germany in the 1930s. Thank you for listening, and I wish you all happiness and health.